And now you have sound.
Okay, so it is now 10 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining us. He's not talking about the available for you. Come and get the donuts. Everything else should be okay. But I'll let you guys do that while we introduce our seminar speaker for today. We're here to talk to you about using Word to your advantage, how to format it, how to format your thesis documents, project documents, better use Word.
All right, good morning. Happy Friday, happy Labor Day weekend. So who out there has started working on a Word document that's got to be 20 or 30 pages and you start to get frustrated because your images move around, lose your annotations, you want to label your figures and you want to talk about the figures in the text. How do you do that? How do you create a document that has heading? And the headings grow as your document gets larger. So what I'm going to talk about today is are some of the more advanced features that are pretty easy to master, actually. So you can format your thesis. So we're going to have a live document we're going to work on. So if you've got your laptops, you can follow along, and hopefully in 50 minutes or so, I can get you to say, wow, that's not too hard to do. And then I want to point you to, and I want to say that this is not only for thesis dissertations, but also for if you're writing on a journal publication. Once you learn to use the style engine that's built into Word, usually you can get a template from the journal you're working on and kind of figure out how to fit your stuff within their the style that they create. So it's really a best practices presentation today. So certainly not the only way to do it, but some of the tools that I'll show you today are the ways that I've learned how to do it, especially when your document starts to get kind of long. So I don't know, so anybody out there that's doing an image with a project, you can use this information. Treat that document, that project report like a thesis. If you're doing a master's thesis, right, that's a longer document. And then certainly if you're doing a dissertation, that's an even longer document. I think my dissertation was almost 400 pages and I think I had 350 references. So, right, that document grows and grows and grows. And so it's better to start early with this, considering you have to turn in this formatted document. Better to start with the best practices than to try and build this document and go back and redo everything. I do want to point you to the fact that the graduate school, so all graduate degrees go through the graduate school, and the graduate school actually has a website that outlines the production of a thesis and dissertation. This section called Preparing Thesis and Dissertations, actually there is a document out there in the world that is available for you. They update it every few years. The one that I had was a copy from 2017, so this is only 2 years old. And this document basically outlines what is absolutely necessary, what they expect you to do, like having a margin for the whole document that's 1.5 inches from the left margin. Anybody want to know why that margin is so big? Or you can't answer? because all these documents used to be bound. We used to have them printed, and so they wanted a little bit extra room on the left-hand side to have the bound part, not kind of get too close to the text. And they still require that, even though a lot of these aren't being printed anymore. But anyway, so if you look at this is approved by the Graduate Council of 2014, but this is revised very recently. And it's got all of these, it's basically the document itself is the format that you want to use for your dissertation or your thesis. And I should say that electrical engineering might have a few different subtle rules. We follow what the graduate school says. So I'm not picking out electrical engineering. Probably if every program has their own kind of subtle rules, they might follow the conventions. Maybe for your annotations for your bibliography might be a little bit different, might use brackets versus a superscript, that kind of stuff. But in general, this is the document that you want to follow. And if you follow the document down maybe halfway through, it actually has several pages that are formatted the way that they want you to follow it. So they talk about the margins. So notice the left margin here is 1.5 inches from the left. The top margin is 2 inches, but that's only the first page of a section. And what I mean by that is, notice that this illustration C is 2 inches. This is a new section, so it's 2 inches. This is another section, so it's 2 inches. And if we, hopefully when we get down into the actual document, it's only the first page of a new section that's 2 inches here, right? So how do you format this? How do you make it to where you don't have to reformat every section of your document? The way you do that in Word is with styles. But notice on the second page, well, let me get to a page that's maybe they don't have one. That's unfortunate. I guess here it is. So this is a new section in your document that starts a new chapter. That's 2 inches margin at the top. So how do you make the next page only have a 1 inch margin at the top? So I'm going to show you some of these tools that are on. The only two things that you need to really master are styles, the bar you see at the top when we open Word in a second. So styles, and then adding section to your document. And so you've been using these before, you just don't really know it. So let's fire up Word, and the first thing that I suggest to everyone when they are, so I've just pulled up a document here. This is the desktop version of Word. Same thing applies for if you work in a browser, right? And I'm just going to kind of blast through all of these suggestions, and everything really kind of hinges on the use of these styles. So why does your document have a default font? This new font that we have is what, Aptos or something like that? Right, so for this version of Word, this default font is Calibri. Why is that the default font in Word? So when you open Word, there's a template that's used, and the template tells the document, I've got a list of these formatting rules that I want you to apply, and that has everything to do with styles. So what I like to do is I like to click on this little button and move styles to the right-hand side. These styles are all of the things that you're using in your document, and you get to have control of all of them. You actually can create a template that when you start your Word document, it doesn't have Calibri. It has Times New Roman or Arial or whatever you want to use. So you can have a template depending on what kind of document that you're working on. And I've got a template that I'll share with you that will have some of these elements in it so you can have a starting point. So this default font, notice when so there's one thing, if I hit enter, right, now my cursor's in the middle of the page. It's actually the first thing you should always be turning on when you're using Word is if you look at your little paragraph region. So this is formatting for the paragraph. This little button here shows and hides all of the characters that are hidden that dictate when a new paragraph happens, when a new section happens, whether that section is shifting to the next page. I think a lot of us have used Control Enter to do a page break, right, to force yourself to the next page, right? So all of these things can be seen. Even spaces show up as little dots, right? So you can kind of get a feel for why you have the spacing that you have. But the first thing you should always turn on is this paragraph formatting. Right now, all you have to do to turn that on is here. So anything related to pagination, spacing, tabs, things like that. If you hit the tab button, you'll actually see an arrow there. So it dictates. The other thing you might want to turn on under view is to turn on your ruler. So the ruler tells you where your margins are at the top, right? And then we'll get to navigation pane here in a minute. So that's the first thing you want to turn on is show those paragraph marks so you can see everything. When you start laying down images and you want to know why images suddenly are being pushed to the next page, things like that, you'll actually see all images, whether the way I have you do them is put them in a text box, you will see an anchor on the page. And the anchor tells you what paragraph the image is kind of tied itself to. So you can adjust that if you need to make it stop pushing off to the next page. We'll get to that. So you want to use sections and section breaks. This is the way that you can change the margins for subtle pieces of document. So if anybody's ever used a document that has 2 columns, well, that section of text is actually a separate section. The only way you can have 2 margins or 2 columns of text is if you have a section that's kind of isolated in the middle of the document. So this is kind of hidden, and a lot of people don't play with some of these options, but you have to master them. If you're going to write a 200 or 300 page document, you have to kind of know how Word works. Unless you're in computer science and you like latex or latex or whatever you want to say, if you want to write a programming language to write your dissertation, feel free, but Word can do it all. So how do you add a separate section? So if you look down, if you right click on the bottom border, there are some options you can turn. If you're ever writing an abstract and they tell you you can only have 2,500 characters, guess what? There's actually well, there should be. See it right now. There should be the status bar should tell you what section, how many characters there are, but I don't see it. Maybe that's an advanced thing you got to go turn on. But notice I can click on this section, and now it tells me that I'm on section 1, right? So this whole document is in section 1. So if I want to change the margins to this page, everybody's done this, right? So I only have 1 section in my document. If I go to margins and change the custom margins, I'll only have 2 options of changing the margins right now. I only have 1 section in my document. So if I wanted to make this left margin 1.5 inches, and we want that to be 1.5 inches everywhere, right? That's where I do it. And if I want on this first page to make my top margin 2 inches, that's where I do it. And then it asks you, what do you want to apply it to? You want to apply it to the whole document? You want to apply it to this point forward? Well, the only option you have right now is this, is the whole document. So if you click on OK, your margins have been shifted, right? This is the way we want all pages to have a margin that's 1.5 inches on the left. But when you start a new section or a new chapter, right, you want the first page to be 2 inches. That's how you introduce the new material, right? It's a clear new section. That extra space at the top is what they want for, to tell us that it's a new section, a new collection of material. So if I want to change, if I want to add a section, right, what do I do? Well, that's this option that says here on the layout that's called breaks. So the breaks allow you to add different page breaks and section breaks. So that shift enter you've always used to force the next page is actually that first option. But what we want to do is look at section breaks. And I'll show you the magic that happens when you learn how to use sections. So I'm going to choose, let's see, the first thing I'm going to do is just do a next page. So notice that I have a next page enter, just like shift enter, but it says section break. So if I have text that's below that section break, right, and I do have text below that section break, right, in the lower left, right? Now it says section 2. Right, so now I have 2 separate sections. So if I go to margins on this page, right? If I go to margins on this page and I go to custom margins, it shows me in this section what the margins are. Now I have a new option in this apply to apply to just to this section. So if I wanted to make this section margin be 1 inch at the top, I can, right? So this section has a margin that's 2 inches. Now I have the next page that has a margin that's only 1 inch. So this is how you start isolating the sections of your document, match the formatting that is required. And so as we build this, we'll see what happens. So let's say this is our let's see, I'm gonna kind of follow my slide. So use section and section breaks, right? The styles are your friend. So when you start typing, I want chapter 1, and I want that to be formatted differently than the rest of the text, right? And so what does that mean? Well, I want this to be chapter. Let's say we're going to call this introduction, and it's going to be our chapter 1. We don't call it chapter 1. Maybe we want to say. Maybe we want to use numbering, and so we want to give this a numeric bullet point, right? We enumerate these headings, right? So right now, if you look, this section here, this is just normal text. If I want to rank this, so if you think in terms of an outline. So the best way, what I recommend my students do is when you start writing is come up with a really good outline. If you have a detailed outline, it kind of helps organize your thoughts. So you can kind of work on subsections of your idea, and that kind of can grow. So it's kind of like the idea of if you're going to write a journal paper, usually you write to the data. So what images are you going to include? You can start with the images and kind of write around that. But I want to make this kind of a heading. Right? That's the idea, and the styles will allow you to do this. So if you look over here, you have options of what styles to include. By default, it's recommended. These are kind of the normal styles that you might use, and you can also make a shorter list of just the ones that are in use, right? And you can order them in terms of as recommended. I like to use alphabetical because it's easier to find once you start building your own styles. So I'm gonna say this is my chapter heading, right? So this would be in an ordered rank. This would be maybe heading 1. So if I use words heading 1, notice I get this weird 2 things. One is the format changes, right? And the second thing that happens is this navigation pane opens. What the navigation pane is kind of a live outline for you to use. And I'll show you why that's helpful as our document kind of grows. But I don't like this heading. I don't like the fact that it's blue. I don't like the font, right? The font actually is inherited from the normal. But notice you've got a style here that's called normal. So that normal font, right? The font size, the line spacing, and all of that stuff is what is driving your document when you open up this template. And Microsoft has provided a template for you. So that's really where I start, is you can right click on any of these styles and you can go to modify. So modify style is where you can change anything about this particular style. So no matter where you have text or sections in your document that lean on that style, if you decide you want to change the style, every place in your document that has those styles will be automatically updated. It's almost like magic. So the default font is Calibri, right? Well, I want to change that. So most of the time we're going to use either Arial or Times New Roman. So for this normal style, I'm going to change that to Times New Roman. And then I want to change, I can go to paragraph. So these are the details about line spacing before and after, the initial line of a new paragraph having a right hanging indents and things like that, right? We've used all of these things before, but what we want to do is insert all those ideas in the styles. So I want to make the normal double spaced because that's what they, and you can decide later about spacing before and after those paragraphs. But everything is driven by, notice the style based on entry is blank, basically. This is the base style that everything else is driven. So if you change the font in this one, all the other ones that are kind of based on the normal style will inherit the new font. So now anytime I type normal text, right? So notice on that paragraph where I've got my cursor, this little box tells me that I'm using style. So now when I type this text, right, it has the new font, right? So anywhere in my document that I'm using normal, that font is going to track, right? So if I have a style that's based on normal, and I'll show you what that means in a second, and I change normal font, it'll inherit, right? It's like a trickle down thing. But I want to change this heading, right? I want to change this from this weird Calibri, the original font. I want to change this heading to what I like it to be. So how do you do that? Well, I'm going to just go ahead and change this to Times New Roman and do it after the fact. I also want this to be 12. I don't want the font to be blue, so I'm going to change the font color to, usually I just use automatic. Maybe I want all caps, and maybe I want it centered, right? So this little dot that you don't see if you don't have the paragraph control pressed, right? This tells me that I have I'm using a style there. And notice you've got this little this triangular caret. So you're going to have all of this other text before. So when you start using these headings, guess what? Everything below it, I actually can compress. So if you want to work on a certain section of your document, you can hide all the other pieces. What if I want to, so anyway, let's update our style. So if I select this line, I'm on heading 1, right? So this box tells me that that's the style. It's this little tip strip. If you hover over that, it'll tell you kind of a subset of the settings for that style. But what I want to do is right click and go to update heading to match selection. But before I do that, let's write a few more headings. So let's say that I want to have, what's the second chapter that you're going to write? Maybe background, right? That's right now normal. If I change that to heading, it's going to be the original format, right? That was the original format of heading. So what's the next chapter? Notice what's going on. Since I have 2 heading entries. My navigation pane, right? I've got these headings in here. So this outline of your document is starting to be built because you're using styles. So what's the next chapter after background? Come on, y'all are too quiet. Come on, it's Friday, vacation weekend. Come on. Maybe materials and methods. Maybe we want a results. Maybe we want a discussion. Maybe we want a conclusion. Ooh, it's hard to type on stage. And then maybe we have, so here's your, I don't have my readers on. So right now, these are all normal. There's no style associated with them. Full. So if I want to change these to the heading, right, all I have to do is select them. I select those, change those to headings, and then look at the navigation pane on the left. So suddenly all those entries, that database of the sections of the document that are using that heading are now available to you. And guess what? You can use those as hyperlinks in your document. You can go to that section just by clicking over here, right? I'll go straight to the bibliography, straight to the conclusion, straight to the discussion. But I don't like this format. I like this format. So what I'm going to do is I've changed that to, I've changed the formatting, but that's just for this section. I want to make that the default formatting for all my heading 1. So if I select this row, update heading to match selection. Now, what's going to happen is all of the other lines that have that style, that use that style will be updated because I'm changing the defaults for that particular style, right? What if I want that heading to have a number? And so we'll start adding some text. So if you have text, right, I'm just adding a couple of lines afterwards. This is the advantage of using the styles. Just adding a little bit of text between each one of those is if you can actually collapse each one of these sections as you're writing so you're not kind of distracted, right? That's what using these headings allow you to do. You can kind of compartmentalize your document. So what if I want to add numbers to this? Well, if I go to heading 1 and I right click and go to modify, I have the option of adding numbering, right? So I'm going to make the numbering as part of the heading. So the next time I use heading, it's going to auto numerate. It's going to go, well, what's the last heading? The last one was 2. This one probably should be 3. Right, and you can change whatever format you want. It looks like an Arial or Calibri. So I'm going to define a new number format. Change the style. I can change the font here, and you can do some things after the fact too. So I'm going to change this font to Times New Roman, and I'm going to say that it's 12. I'll click on OK, and I want Roman numerals. Right, so now I have this new option. I click on OK, and I kind of see I should see let's turn it on after the fact. There we go. So now my heading, if I change the style of the heading, I've got a enumerated list of all my heading chapters. So styles are your friends, maybe not the default style. So you have to go in, and what I do is I'll create a document and save it as a template. So my default template is now not these weird colored fonts, bulleted, items. Start from scratch and work from a template. So there is a list of styles that come with the default. It's the file that lives on your computer, .dot. It's document template. You can make your own. But you create these styles as you go to help you with formatting, right, and organizing your documents. Don't forget about that outline view. So there's 2 methods to do this. This navigation pane is one. We're going to start adding subheadings, right? So how do I, in the introduction, what if I want a section called section 1.1, 1.2? What about 1.21, 1.22, 1.23? So notice there's heading 1 and heading 2. You can create subheadings that organize, and you can tell it that it's in terms of an outline. So there's actually an outline view in Word under View. You can go to Outline, and this gives you the heading organization, kind of like a more expanded version of your navigation page, right? And you see these pluses. You can actually, within this view, you can expand and contract to see what is all the material that's in between those sections. But let's close that outline view and let's start adding some other subheadings. So let's say the first section, let's say we want a section called I'll call this section 1.1. I'm going to call this section 1.2. I'm going to call this section 1.2.1, and I'm going to call this section 1.2.2, and then I'll have a section 1.3. Right? So these are just normal entries, right? There's no attachment styles other than they're all configured normal. So what you can do is, this is actually a second level heading, right? So if you think about organization, right, you've got the first level, which is the main levels of your chapter. Basically, you want to add a second level, and that's actually heading 2. But it gets a little complicated if you start having subheadings. So if I click on heading 2 for this entry, right, it has this default formatting. We don't really like that, right? So I'm going to change that, right? What do I want? Well, I want Times New Roman. I want size 12, and I want to make the font black, right? So now this is heading 2. But what I like to do, my best practice suggestion, is to create a new heading called heading 1.x, right? So for all of these numbers, this is 1.x, this would be 1.x style, this would be 1.2.x, right? And we can build these headings and use them. So watch what happens when I have to make this the default. Because this is a style, I can collapse that section, right? Right now, all those other lines are right under this section, so I actually can collapse them. But I want to change the heading style to match this. So it's really easy. Right click, update heading 2 to match selection. So now I want this to be heading, right? This is now its own, but this is a different one. How are we going to do that? So what I like to do is, instead of using this default heading 2, I want to create a new one of these. Is add style, manage styles, new style. The older versions of Word have a plus there. It's a lot easier to see. So I want to click on new style, right? And notice that style based on is not blank. It says heading 2. So it's based on this heading 2 that I've created, but I'm going to call it heading 1.x. Why do I call it 1.x? Because the x is the number that's growing, right? You want to make it generic for that one. The heading 1.x, I can click OK, right? So now I have a heading 1.x, and this becomes important later on when you make a table of contents. But this does not, we don't want this to be heading 1.x. We want this to be heading 1.2x. What do? Well, I can temporarily put it as heading 1.x, but I'm going to create a new heading based on 1.x, right? And I'm going to call it heading 1.1. All right, so 1.2.x. So what do we have to do? Well, we have to change the numbering. We don't want the numbering to be based on the original numbering. We've got to add a new numbering feature. So how do we do that? We do that in format, numbering. We want to create a new number format. I want it to be numbers, and I can change the number formats. Notice this little gray area, right? The little gray area is the field that's going to be incremented. So I can actually erase that period and go to the left of that, and I'll say 1.2 point. Sorry, 1.2 point. Click on OK, and so now I have a new numbering format. If I want this section to have that numbering, I can modify this and go to my numbering, and I want to change a new number format. I want that just to be 1.x, right? So that 1 is growing, so 1.1 dot is going to be the constant part. If I click on OK, now I can choose that. So now anywhere I use this heading, and of course, if you change the alignment of that, you can just right click and go update heading to match selection. Then all of the sections that use that style are going to inherit, right? So this is how you build your document with styles. Basically, it's up to you. And of course, the formatting you want to follow, left justified and all that stuff, you just have to conform, right? You have to conform to the style that's in that document or to your own department or whatever. And notice the navigation pane on the left-hand side, right? Because these are considered subheadings, right? Suddenly I've got these entries in my outline. So in my navigation pane, I actually can collapse, right? And I can see this outline, and I can drill down into the outline. I actually can go here and collapse all of the information below, in between this heading 1 style and the heading style 2, right? So the style engine that's inside of Word drives all of this formatting. And so if you can dig into this and understand how it works and build your template, build your document with these, super powerful. Makes your life so easy, because if I want to change anything formatting wise, everything will inherit that uses that style. All right. What about table of contents? So suddenly my document, I'm using these styles. Do the table of contents inherit, right? But anything that's based on heading 1 will be moved into the table of contents. So the only thing that I didn't mention that you have to do is the level, right? So if you think about your the level of entry in your table of contents, right? This is the primary level. So you would call that level 1. This would be level 2, but notice that this is in line here. So what should 121 be? Should be level 3. So where does that come in? Well, that's actually a style as well. So if I go to this entry for heading 1.2.x and I modify it, under paragraph, I have an option that says outline level. So I want to make that outline level 3 because it's got 3 digits in the enumeration, right? So I make that level 3 and click on OK and watch what happens, right? So now 1.2.1 is this 3rd level. That even shows up in your outline view. So if you go to review, to view outline, now you'll see this document that you can expand, right? So I've got 1.1, I can expand or contract all of the information below, in between this style and the next style, right? 1.21, I can collapse. 1.2, I can collapse, right? So everything inherits. So how do you make your table of contents? If you use styles, it's terribly easy. So I'm going to hit Control Enter just to create a secondary, a page in front, right? So how do we do that? We go to References, insert a table of contents, and generally the first option is the best. You're going to have, notice you don't have any styles related to your table of contents here, but as soon as you drop down that table of contents, right? And it all comes from the use of styles. So when I drop that in, you've got these new entries for table of contents. So however you want to format those entries, notice I've got level 1, I've got level 2, I've got level 3. That's why it's so interesting. It's so important to have your styles have a level in the paragraph setting. But I also have this table of contents heading. You can either delete that. I usually do and make my own, right? But this table of contents heading format is just this built-in Word thing, right? So you might want to make it match your heading 1. But it's really easy to do. If you make changes, and of course it maps itself to the page numbers, right? If you make some changes, you can just click on this little box and hit Update Entire Table, and right, it'll go through your document and automatically enumerate. So let's see. So what about placing images? So what are best practices? So this you got to play with a little bit to get used to the styles. The styles drive everything. What about placing tables and images? So my best practice. So let's pretend that this section 1.3 has an. Oh, I forgot to. Let's make this heading 1.2.1. Now that I did that, I can update my big bibliography. I can just right click anywhere in it, update the table, and now I've got this entry for 1.2.2. So this database in the background is tracking the use of your styles, and it makes everything terribly easy, just automatic. You don't even have to think about it. But if you have a 150-page document and you're trying to rework your styles and all that stuff, much harder to do after the fact. You want to kind of go into it with these ideas in mind. So what I do for images is to make them easy to move around on the page is put them in a text box. So what I do is I insert text box and I make that text box fit to the margins. And then I want to change, obviously this is just some dummy text. I want to right click on the edge and change the wrap text to top and bottom. And then eventually I like to leave these boarded right now so you can see them, but we can remove the border later on. So what I'm going to do is just go grab, I'm going to insert a picture, stock images, right? This is out somewhere in the world. There's a bunch of images that you can go and grab and use in your document. So I'll just drop this down. Right, so now I've got this this figure Another good thing about using the text box and expanding for a dissertation, you don't want word wrap. You know, when you write a journal, you can kind of have the text on the left and text on the right and that kind of stuff. You don't want that in a thesis. In a thesis, you want to have your images isolated by themselves. And you also want to call out your image in your text. You don't ever put an image in a document and give it a caption and then never mention it in the text. You always want to say, in figure 1, blah, 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 you can have a much longer caption, right? But how do you add a caption? So I've added this figure, right? But I want to change the formatting of this. So guess what? We're going to create a style for figures. How do we do that? Well, I'm going to format. I want this to be centered, right? Notice that this paragraph is based on normal. I want to add a new format, and I'm going to call this figure. So everywhere I use a figure, I'm going to use that format. So how do you add a caption to a figure? In Word, it's really easy. Just click on the figure and right click, and you have an option to insert caption, and it's give you this dialog box. Notice that the caption has formatting. We're going to change that. Why? Because we have control of styles. But it says, what's the label? You actually can call this an image or whatever you want. You actually can create a new label. Their figure is default, and we want to put it below. So for images and plots, graphs, the caption is below. For tables, the caption precedes it, right? So figure and below. And the best thing about it is Word keeps track of all of these, right? So now I have the ability to move my figure within the text. And notice if you in the left-hand side, when I move that around, look at the anchor. You see the anchor that's in the paragraph above it, hovering over 1.22. That means that this text box is anchored to that paragraph. If I move it up one, that anchor moves, right? So this is why your image moves around. It's because it's tied to a certain paragraph, and if the paragraph moves, right, your image is going to move. You can lock it. There's some things that you can do, but first thing I want to do is change the format of this caption. So notice we have a new style, right, called caption. But I want to make a new style called image caption. Why would I want to do that? Because I might have a different format for my table caption. And by creating that style, you actually can make a table of contents based on the style. So let's change this format to 12. I'm going to select all of that, change the format to 12, font of 12, change the color to black, and I don't want it to be italicized. So let's see. Lady in, where do you think she is? Greece, Italy, somewhere, maybe Greece, something like that, right? So there's the caption, right? But what I want to do is select that, and based on the original caption, right, I want to create a new caption, and I want to call this figure caption. But everywhere I have a figure caption, I want to use that style, and I'll show you why here in a second. But how do you call this out in the text? Well, maybe let's say I'm gonna force this down to the bottom edge, and let's say I want to talk about this. Just to make it easy, I'm going to delete that little section here, and I'm going to just start typing some. Another thing you can do while you're formatting is, did you know you can double click to hide the white space when you're working on text? You can collapse this. I don't know, it's not going to let me do it. This mouse is kind of funny, but generally you can collapse that. There you go. So you don't see the gap between pages. So it just looks like one big giant document. So I'm gonna just start typing some text here. I'm going to say in figure 1, there is a lady, right? And whatever we're talking about. So this is hard typed, right? So what happens if I move the figure around? Then I have to chase down every figure and change the number to figure 1. So how do I map this figure 1, which is being tracked by the database in Word? How do I track that? Well, it's a cross-reference. So in figure 1, I can highlight this. I'm going to go to references, cross-reference, and this is the database of everything that's enumerated in your document. So I'm going to go and instead of numbered item, I'm going to say figures, right? This is the reference type. So if you have image instead, it would be in this list if you change the label. Figure, and I only want the label and the number. Click on insert. And now, if you hover over that, you see it's grade, right? Now this label is tied to this label. So if you move this around and update your document, this is changed to figure 2, right? So now I want to make a table of contents of my images. So let's skip down a couple pages. So maybe on this page, I want to make a table of contents of my images. So I can go to references, insert table of figures. I don't want to use the default for Word. I want to use this option, and all I have to do is go look for, say, hey, everything that has figure caption, I want you to make a table. I want you to make a table of images. If I go to options here, and I want to use figure caption, and I click on OK, then suddenly I have a table of figures. Everywhere I use the style, that's figure caption, I'll get a listing of where they are. Super powerful. Same thing for a table caption. My recommendations, let me turn the spacing on. So let's say I want to have let's create a table real quick, because we're getting close to the end here. If I insert a table, I also can create a table caption. So we can insert caption. This is a table, so we want this to be above. Word even knows it should be above, right? Table 1. I'll call it an empty table. And then I want to change the formatting. Don't want it to be italicized. I want it to be 12 font, and I want it to be black. Once again, I want to create a new style and call it table caption. Right? And now everywhere I use a table, I'm going to use this. Same thing. You can call the table. In table 1, there's nothing in your text document, right? You can insert a cross reference to that. But if I want to create a table of a list of tables, we don't call it a table of tables, we call it a list of tables. Let me make another page here, an empty page. So I want to references, insert a table of figures, but it's not a table of figures. It's going to ask you, do you want to replace? You already have one in there, right? But I want to use table caption. And if I click on OK, it's going to say, do you want to replace? No, I don't want to replace, because it's a new entry based on the style. Everything is driven with style. If you can master styles, it'll make it so much easier in your writing. It's the table of contents. Don't use words. You can. Words got built-in tracking for references. EndNote is free. Get to use EndNote. EndNote allows you to search for documents. It'll find the PDFs. It builds a database so you can go back and actually read the references that you put in your document. And EndNote is a plugin. It's not installed here, but it winds up being a tab here in your document. So you actually can go search for references based on keywords, author names, things like that, right from in Word, because it launches EndNote, things like that. Let's see, last things to wrap up. So just be consistent, try and map your document as much as possible to the recommended formatting. Start early with your formatting. Don't have 100-page. You can have a 100-page document that you try and reformat. But yes, I guess the last little tip that I'll give is, what happens if you have a long caption? Now is the time for all good men to come to the aid of their country. So this is kind of a long caption, right? Sorry, I wrote D twice. So if I go back to my table of contents, and I update this figure caption, I update this field, right? It goes over 2 lines, right? What if I only wanted lady in Greek? What if I only wanted lady in Greece? Is there any way that you can have this line? It would be really nice to be able to split formatting. So right now, formatting is, all lines are connected. And so there's a little tip that's hidden in here that says use a style separator, Control Alt Enter. So Control Alt Enter is a little character that you can include to let you separate. This is the last little tip that I'll give you. So if I select this text, Control Alt Enter, notice that I've got this little character right here. You see that little character? It's basically a paragraph character with a little box around it. So now I can cut that and I can put it right after wherever I want to split, right? Now, since I have that that isolation character, if I go back to my table of contents and I right click and update that field, oh, it's backward. So let me change the formatting here to change this to normal, and I want to change just this section to figure caption, right? So this figure caption is, so this style is figure caption, this style is normal. So now if I go back to my entry, it only shows that one little section. So in your table of contents, you can have a briefer caption. Your caption could be as long as you want. Some journals allow you to have big descriptive captions, logical data, things like that. You can put a lot of captions. But your table of contents, you probably don't want a big old giant long caption. So that's the last little tip. But do not be afraid of words. Learn to use styles. And if you have any questions,
Very nice. If you kind of figure that off, but I have the other.
yeah, they'll push an endnote for sure.
Behind it on the QR code on the back.
Yeah, so, figures.
I think I
But that's like we have it highlighted. Right now, highlight